When compositing things, I always find it best to shoot on a gray background, and that's because white is just too easy to blow out, causing you to lose detail. Also, the white acts as a big reflective surface, which can be a pain, so you don't want to be shooting with that as your background. I already taught you how to mask out a specific area in the previous tutorial with the strange familiar sky swapping lesson. This picture is going to follow that same formula, but it gets even easier because now the background is just one solid color. I've already gotten this image of a sunset here and dragged it on top of the background layer of the band. And then I duplicated this background layer of the band, put it on top of the sunset layer, and then I masked out the guys using a layer mask. To do it, it was really easy because I shot on the gray background. So if I just turn off the sunset layer here, and then I get my magic wand tool, I can just kind of click around, hold shift to select more areas, and just select all that gray in between their legs here too. Like that. Okay. Oh, and a little bit more up here. Usually that gets the selection pretty close, but if you want to fine tune it, I suggest you go up here to select and then refine edge. So in the refine edge box, there's a lot of different things to play with. You see radius, contrast, smooth, feather here, but my favorite is contract and expand. Because when I usually make selections, especially with the magic wand tool, one of the problems that I always have is there's always a little bit of edge around my selection of the background left over, making it look a little bit cut out and fake. So what you can do is down here, these are all the different view methods and view modes where you can view how your selection is. My favorite here is this red one called Quick Mask. But as you scroll around, contract, and expand, you can see the actual selection of the red gets smaller and bigger. So just keep an eye on that red area around the edge here and watch what happens when I bring it all the way down. You see it's selecting the edge outside of the face. This is going outside of the selection when you hit minus. And adversely, if you move this from minus all the way to plus, it's going to go inside the area that you're trying to mask out. So in this case, inside the subject selection here. So you can see that I've got a little bit of edge here along the corners left over. So I'm not going to use it at 100%, maybe around 50%. And beyond the contract and expand, you can also play around with feather and smooth. And smooth is just going to make all those little jagged lines a little bit more curved. And the feather is going to soften the edges of your selection. And all these things can be further fine-tuned up here with the radius and the contrast, which is how these things speak to the image. So I'm just going to turn out the smoothness a little bit and maybe feather it by about 2 pixels, and then I'll hit OK. So now that you can see with the selection here, it's actually a little bit outside of the gray area and inside the subjects, which is fine because now you're not going to get any of those little jagged edges. So with the sunset layer on beneath, all I did was paint away on the mask above it to expose that sunset below. Now you'll notice here that the hairs on this guy's face aren't exactly flawless, and I had to use the brush tool on a really small brush just to kind of go in there and then paint away. Now that works fine and all, but if you go up here, you're going to see even a bigger problem that I don't want to mask all these little hairs because that's just a pain in the ass. So if I turn on that sunset layer on and off, you can see there's a lot more little hairs that I'm missing out on. Go over to this guy's head here, especially at the top. There's no way I want to fine tune and paint all these little hairs just because that's going to take hours and hours. There's got to be another way around it. But remember, we're very smart. We knew that we were going to Photoshop this, and that's why we used a gray background in the first place. If we want that sunset to show up but still have some of the details of the things in front of it, here's what we do. We select that sunset layer and then change the blending mode from normal to hard light, and there you go, bam. Let me just switch back and forth between normal and hard light, and you can really see the difference here. Look at that. Hard light has more contrast, but it's also taking on characteristics of the tones in the gray background. Do you remember how in the photo shoot video how we purposely lit that background not perfect? We used a beauty dish to kind of give it a gradient effect. Well, now you can see why. As I switch between hard light and normal, the sky just blends together better with our image now that it has darker corners. We didn't even have to use Photoshop to add a vignette. Now something still doesn't look completely right here, and that's the sun. If I were to take this picture with my camera, the sun would be flaring right here. Now I don't want to spoil the image too much, but I think a little bit of atmosphere is going to make everything come together a little better. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get this selection tool here, and on the sunset layer only, I'm going to just make a really rough circle around where the sun is, like that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but something like that will work. Okay. Now I'm going to hold down Control and click and hit Layer via copy. For Windows users, I believe you have to right click. So now I have my selection area just in a new layer there, and that's the only thing on that layer. So I can turn it back on everything, and I'm going to drag this layer, layer 1, to the top. And as you can see, the blending mode is still on hard light. So now just looking at this with my eyes, you can see, okay, now the sun is also in front, because in real life that flare, if it were flaring into the lens, it's going to be in front of your subjects, not behind them. But there's too much detail in there, and you can tell, of course, obviously, that it's cut out. It looks like crap. So what are we going to do? Go up here to Filter, Blur, and do a Gaussian blur, and you'll have your problem pretty much solved now. So turn the radius all the way up here. Just maybe something along right there. Okay, so now we have a flare, but I don't want it to ruin the image too much. It's still advertising the band, so I still want to see the guys. So I'm going to make another layer mask here for this top layer. Okay, and then just with the black brush, I'm going to paint back some of the guys' face that are hid a little bit too much. So I'm just going to have a really soft brush here, and my opacity is on maybe around 20% will do us good. And I'm just going to kind of paint back some of the face here. And just get a little bit of a bigger brush here. Blend the edges into the coats. Maybe just a little bit more on this back guy here. And that looks perfect. So let me just turn that on and off. I think we could even turn the opacity down on this top layer just to take it down a notch collectively. Right there. See, that looks perfect. Now we've got kind of a layer sandwich going on here. Let me just walk you through it. Okay, the background layer, just the band on the gray background. Second layer is that sunset just thrown over top on hard light blending mode. And then we duplicated that background layer, put it on top of the sunset, and used a layer mask to cut out all the gray area, exposing the sunset layer below. And then it just looked a little bit too fake with that flare. We had to add it in front in the foreground, so that's this top layer right here. There you go, perfect. And the last thing that I would do to this image is just give it a little bit of crop, just because I can still see a little bit of the edges of the seamless background here. There we go.